Actually, April Fool's Day of 2013, my daughter actually got ran over by the mailman. It was one of those life-changing moments, though, because at that moment I was working corporate retail, traveling 3 weeks a month, and I thought, this is the life. Like, but what I really realized after that day is that I was missing out on my family.
The best sales tool to land more clients is just, hey, look what your neighbor did. Look what we did to get them there. Do you like more money? The case studies are such a good way to scale, even if you own your own property too. Just having a good, solid case study, like you said, 30K to 70K, speaks for itself.
What is going on, STR Nation? This is your host and brother from my mother, Emanuele Pani, here with the man himself, Mr. Mike Riley. What's going on, Ralph?
Doing awesome, man. It's the day before Independence Day. So really looking forward to spending some time with the family. And I was just running some numbers last night with my buddy Dylan, who I helped him buy his property in a big golf town, actually where he's from, him and his wife, Tori. And he bought this house. It was like a $750,000 house, bought it in February this year, put 10% down. And the house previously had had one of those permits to do short-term rentals for, which not all houses in that area do. It's all grandfathered in. Anyways, the previous homeowner did $30,000 in gross revenue, and they went all out. They listened to everything, did the sauna, the fire pit, the hot tub, and just in 3.5 months being live, they've already got 97 book nights and $90,000 on the books. So I was underwriting it to do about 100K in 12 months. Like that would be a good year. And what we were really going for was like 120, 130. That'd be a 20% cash on cash return. This is on pace to do 160. So I told him, I was like, hey man, I'm gonna need a raise over here, like the way that we just went through that whole process. And we looked everywhere too. We looked in Western North Carolina, we are putting offers out there, but then we found this one town, and I couldn't be happier for them. Just couldn't be happy for them. So that's what I'm excited about this week. But
That's amazing.
what about you, brother? What's new in your world?
Yeah, man. So I am still in Italy. So the 4th of July tomorrow is just gonna be a normal Friday. But it's been an interesting week. Last week on Friday, I went. So one of my uncles volunteers at a shelter, at a dog shelter, and so I went with him. And when I got back from the shelter, my grandpa had some kind of stroke or something happened. And so when I got back home for lunch, he wasn't using his right side of his body, his right hand. He couldn't speak anymore. And so we had to take him to the hospital on Saturday morning. And so it's been a week of back and forth to the hospital. My grandma and my grandpa had been married for 7 years. And so one is getting to, first of all, use all of this material and all of this mindset work that I do and that I help other people do for business on life to stay serene and to hold serenity for other people in this situation is a gift. So I feel very, very grateful. And one of the biggest things that I've been thinking about is understanding as everybody gets very flustered and frustrated that they're just a result of their thoughts. And understanding that after 7 years, my grandma is scared shitless of losing her partner. And so bringing kindness and care to that moment. And also really is very interesting witnessing my dad, not being my dad, but being my grandpa's son, and witnessing your father losing his father. It's a very interesting moment. It's a very interesting dynamic, right? To be the supporting son for once versus always being loved and supported by my dad. And just love, man, like just the love of like being there for my grandpa and being there for the family. It makes me very grateful that I decided to come here for as long as I did. I knew that something was calling me to stay here for this long in the summer, and it now all kind of makes sense. So yeah, that's been my week. So I'm super grateful he's doing better. He's still here with us. But again, I'm just grateful to be here and kind of switch topic. We had a great time today. We had Joe Rohne on the show, and Joe is one of the agents with Tyler Kuhn's Savvy team. And he just had a super inspiring story about taking a leap of faith and really making sure that you understand that sometimes you got to put the chips all in and have faith and bet on yourself, and that life will pay you what you ask for it of it the
Yeah.
moment that you actually ask it.
Yeah. I mean, it's not even changing topics. I mentioned that property in Pinehurst. It's like the numbers on that are great, yeah, but at the end of the day, being able to spend time with your family, have the flexibility to go back to Italy. And then same thing with Joe. Like he told us a story about his daughter getting run over by a car when she was 5 years old. And he was traveling, traveling 3 weeks out of a month and barely seeing her at that time too. And so him taking that leap of faith to say, hey, I'm going to change my lifestyle right now. And he did it by starting a landscaping business and like mowing lawns. And so it could be anything for anybody. But once you have that realization of like, I need to be here, I need to make a change, listen to that and take bigger chances, as you told me earlier, too.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we don't know how much time we have left here. It could be today. It could be at 97, which is a blessing. That is beating the average by a lot. But it's never easy when that time does come.
100%. So, without further ado, we welcome Joe Rohne on the show. And listen up and get inspired, guys, because it's your life, man. Go change it. What's going on, brother?
How you guys doing?
I'm doing amazing, man. I'm excited to have you on the show. We had the pleasure of meeting, and so I would love to just hear your story. I know you've been doing this for a little while, and you have reached quite a bit of financial freedom from it, both you and your wife, and you have a very interesting story. So why don't you give our listeners kind of like a little rundown of who Joe is?
Yeah. So, my wife and I got into entrepreneurship when we were pretty young. We actually bought a preschool in St. Louis all the way back in 2007. But, and it paid the bills. It was doing really well, or still is doing well. We still own it to this day. But I was still working the W-2. And then go back to like 2012, 2013. It was actually April Fool's Day of 2013. We had an accident. My daughter actually got ran over by the mailman. She survived. It was one of those life-changing moments though, because at that moment I was working corporate retail. Like many people, I was putting in 80, 90 hours a week. I was traveling 3 weeks a month, and I thought, this is the life. Like, I'm making well into the six figures. I'm traveling all over the country. But what I really realized after that day is that I was missing out on my family. And I literally quit my W-2 job that week. I started cutting grass, and I mowed grass from 2013 all the way to 2023, really 22. But while I was cutting grass, I just started reading books, listening to your guys' podcast, listening to other podcasts, knowing that I wanted to change the direction of our future. And we finally, 2022, made that next leap and got our first short-term rental.
It's amazing. So, what was the conversation like? Right, you guys had the preschool. You're doing the W-2. You had a high corporate paying job with the W-2. Then this thing happened with your daughter. What was the conversation like with your wife? Because that's a question that I know both Mike and I get a lot. Right, it's like, how do I convince my spouse? Like, I have this inkling. I've been listening to all these podcasts. How do I convince my wife or my?
My wife and I, we've been married 23 years, almost 24 now. We have always been jumpers. Like even when we bought our preschool, back in 2007, we took all the equity of our house, all of our 401k, all of our savings that we had to buy a preschool, right? We went all in 100%. So, she was actually, I could say that I'm maybe the more conservative one. But after this accident happened and it was time to make a change to get into something else, we were both on the same page. Like before we left the hospital with my daughter, she had broken her pelvis. The wheels actually went over her pelvis, and she was only 5 years old, so watching that was just one of those life-changing experiences. And my wife and I both knew, she had a guardian angel that day, and God was telling us that whatever plan that we were on was the wrong direction for our family. And so it really wasn't even a discussion. We both knew it was time for change.
Wow, I can't even imagine what that must feel like. So from there to here, right? It's been a couple of years. You now have multiple properties. You manage multiple property. Gonna give us a rundown of how the growth happened and what does
Yeah,
your
yes.
responsibility
I mean,
ability look like?
Yeah. When I had the lawn business, I truly kind of had time freedom because I controlled how much I did each day. I could pick up my girls from school. I managed their softball teams, went to all their cheer competitions. It was great. But as they got to a certain age, it was like, okay, now it's time to really plan what our future looks like. Cause, riding on a lawnmower 40, 50 hours a week was not the direction that I wanted to be. It never was a career for me. It was a great job, even though it was my business. So, we both, after reading books, I had gotten my real estate license back in 2020 before COVID. And I started doing real estate part-time while I was cutting grass here in St. Louis. So I'm based in St. Louis. But I wasn't really doing investing. I was just helping homeowners, buy and sell houses, friends and family. And then 2022 rolled around and I said, we had been talking about a short-term rental, had that analysis paralysis for a little while. And we just on a Sunday said, this is the house, let's do it. And we jumped, didn't use AirDNA, didn't underwrite the deal. We just went with our gut feeling, which, it was a good gut feeling because it was a successful 2-bedroom, 2-bath we bought for 425 that we did about 65K. It definitely didn't give us financial freedom, but it got our foot in the door and it made money right away. And real quickly had some friends that saw what we were doing. I had a friend that had a cabin in Branson, was like, I really don't like my property management company. I need someone to manage it. Do you think you could do it? And like within 3 months, I went from owning my first short-term rental to co-hosting my first property within, I guess it was about 3.5 months. So it went really quickly.
Nice, man. That's awesome. To the listeners, please use AirDNA and data, and people like Joe that know the data in the markets before you buy a home. But
Yes.
Joe, like, where did that conversation go like with that friend? How did that conversation come about? If we work with a lot of folks that are trying to land their first coasting deal and they don't really know where to start or even how to have that conversation with that friend, right? What was that like for you?
Yeah, so I was actually the commissioner of the local baseball and softball association. We were having our end of the year dinner and we brought a family in that I had known for years through the softball community, but didn't really know them. And we ended up getting just sitting next to each other at dinner and we just kind of started talking. They started asking us about what we're doing. So of course we were excited about our first short-term rental. They were talking about their cabin and it just kind of hit off and they were like, you know what? I think we're ready to take a chance. So a couple days later, my wife and I went down and said, let's go take a look at it. And we did. And at this point, I had already, at that time I did the boot camp with Bill Faith and did his accelerator program way back in the day because I wanted to learn everything I could at that moment. And so I knew a little bit more by this point. I had been listening to a lot of podcasts and we walked into their cabin and it still had original bedding from when it was built 12 years ago. It had original decor. I was like, okay, like, we'll manage this for you, but we need you to invest a little bit of money so we can make this stand out a little bit better. And they didn't have a big budget. They gave us $2,500 to redo a 4-bedroom cabin. So, wasn't a big budget, but we did charge them 1,500 and we used all 1,500 of that to buy more stuff for the cabin. So we spent about $4,000 all in, knowing that it's our first deal and you're not going to make money in your first deal right away. Sometimes you got to do some things for free. And we spent 3 days in there, painted some walls, put all new bedding in, got some new pillows, some changed some decor around, just did what we could. And we took it in year one from $30,000 a year with their previous property manager to almost $70,000 just by making those minor changes. So they were very, very happy. And at the same time, the cabin next door, when I was pulling up AirDNA, was not doing really well. So I actually contacted that owner, skip traced them, found their contact information, cold called them, and told them what we were doing with the cabin next door and they actually signed on. And so we actually started co-hosting 2 properties by the end of March of 2023, right off the bat.
I love it.
That's awesome. Those case studies I feel like are the best sales tool to land more clients is just, hey, look what your neighbor did. Look what we did to get them there. Do you like more money? It's the case studies are such a good way to scale, even if you own your own property too. Those just having a good solid case study, like you said, 30K to 70K speaks for itself.
Yes. Yep. So that's kind of how we've done our niche. So as we've grown our co-hosting business, we realize that is our niche. So we go after properties that need work and we require them to hire us. My wife has kind of turned into a designer. She's now done 12 properties, working on 13, 14, and 15 right now. We go in and she redesigns them. We go in and do the work. We paint them. We hang wallpaper murals. We get new furnishings, the whole works. And we've helped every single owner that we co-host for redesign their space and kind of turn it into a little bit more of a luxury property co-hosting business, and we currently co-host 10 properties, and we have 3 more coming on.
I love it. So, Joe, for the people that are getting started and maybe they have their first property and they have their first opportunity, right? You said something that was very smart. It's like on your first deal, you may not necessarily make money. And that's an interesting mindset because for me now, I feel two different parts of me that are speaking out. Yes, I agree with Joe. And two, how do you not get run over by people and get taken advantage of, right? And so for somebody that is listening that hears you is like, yes, Joe, you're making sense, right? I should do the same thing. How do you kind of balance the two things and how do you have this conversation with owners? Because that's a dreaded conversation. Thank you so much. I love your home. And also, it's terrible. Please give me money to fix it because you have horrible taste. And I know this is your vacation home, but nobody's going to want to come here, right? So, like, how do you have that conversation?
It's truly 100% data driven, and it's 100% pulling their comps. And when I can pull their comp and say, hey, this identical cabin that's 3 doors down that looks awesome did $90,000 and you're doing 30. Like, if they don't have more amenities in the community, they don't have a hot tub, they don't have, you know, anything better. All they have is a better design and a better management company, and a better revenue management, system. Like, but revenue management can only do so much for a property that is going to be more desirable. So we want your property to look different because there's 40 other cabins in this community that look identical to yours that still have that same bedding that when it was built back in 2012 or 13. They all look the same. They all have the same wall paintings. They have everything's identical. So how are we going to make yours stand out so I can make you more money, which is going to make you more successful? And that's really the conversation. But it's all about showing them the comps of the ones that have done it and what type of revenue numbers they're doing. I'm going through this with one of my owners now, my first ever PCB property that I started co-hosting. It was a 4-bedroom, 3-bath that had, a view, and they were doing $35,000 with the previous property manager, but they don't have a pool. They have room for a pool, and we jumped them from 35 to about 80, which is great. But we can get to the 140 range with the pool. So now I'm, showing that same owner the data, 2 years later and saying, okay, this is the season that we got to take it to the next level. We got to add the pool. We got to add a few more amenities to go from that 80 to that 140 or 150. And it's the same process, pulling the data and showing them what the competition is.
I love it. When you and I talked off air, you told me, and I hope I'm remembering correctly, that you guys said no to, I think it was 25 or 30 properties this year. So you say no.
32.
32. Okay. So you say no more often than you say yes.
I say no way more than I say yes because I have
Give
buy
me-
box. I know exactly what type of property I want to manage. And if it doesn't meet that buy box, then I don't want it.
How did you establish your buy box? So how did that kind of listener do the same thing?
It truly was looking at what properties, and the majority of my business is in Panama City Beach. Like I said, my first 2 properties were in Branson. I still have those 2 cabins, but we bought our first 2 short-term rentals in Panama City Beach. So I knew that was really where I wanted to grow my co-hosting business. So as I started running the data, I mean, the ultimate is to say, okay, I want the beachfront 7-bedroom house with the in-ground pool that's going to do 300 grand a year. We all want that property, but you can't start there, right? You're not going to get someone that has that kind of investment to trust you without some sort of case study. So I said, okay, we got to start here. Now we're going to go after the next best niche, and the PCB market is the 4 to 5 bedroom home that's 1 to 3 blocks from the beach with an in-ground pool, and that's our niche. And that's the type of property that we're going after and the type of property we want to continue to grow our co-hosting business. It's turned into we have a 1 beachfront home, and we're, negotiating to add a couple of more beachfront homes. And, so we're eventually going to shift into hopefully all beachfront homes. But that 1 to 3 blocks with that in-ground pool, $125,000 to $175,000 a year in gross revenue, it makes sense for us and it helps us grow our business.
I love it. Love it. So in addition to that, you recently joined, and I say recently, but maybe it's more than recently, Tyler Kuhn team at Savvy.
Yes.
So tell me, because I know how Tyler kind of runs his team, and I know that you guys put a lot of effort into helping investors buying the right property. And I know that there you guys also say no to them more often than you say yes. So if somebody was listening to this and maybe they have a management side of the business or they're buying their first property, give me the five or the four, like the five non-negotiable things that you help a new investor identifying to make sure that their first property is not just a gut feeling like you guys did, but it's a more like tried and true thing.
I'd say the number one thing, and the reason why I got my real estate license to real quickly in Florida is when I bought my first short-term rental, I realized there are really not very many realtors that actually understand short-term rentals at the beach. They all say they do, but if you're working with somebody, and this is the number one golden rule, if you're working with a real estate agent in a market and they don't own a property in that market, they're probably not the real estate agent, right? If they own and manage their own property, they're going to know, like, I know the PCB market because I now own and manage 10, 11 total properties there. And so that gives me a big niche. My realtor at the time was a good realtor, but she didn't own and manage her own properties and didn't have me go do the data. So, the number one goal is to find out what the investor's goal is, because every investor has different goals. Some people are looking for that 20%, 30% ROI. Some people are looking for the second home that they hope to break even, and some people, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they want that condo because they want to have that beach view. So, the first thing is obviously making sure we're figuring out what their goal is and then finding the property that can achieve those goals. And then, we truly make sure that, like, I don't put anybody on a drip campaign. I actually have a VIP list. I scour the MLS on and off market daily, and I put it on my VIP list. So anyone that's working with me gets to see right now there's 18 homes in the Panama City Beach market that are on my VIP list that I think have potential to be good deals. Now, I have not underwrote every one of those, but they have potential. And they meet the, pretty close to that 15 to 20% gross ROI, potential in there. So we're not sending them 1,000 homes and saying, let me know what you like and we'll get it for you. I'm telling them what works. And, obviously if they're looking for a condo, I have a different VIP list for condos, that we're looking for. And then want to make sure that, we actually run a pro forma, put real data into a spreadsheet so they understand the numbers. Because at the end of the day, of course, there's no guarantee, right? And I like what Kenny Bedwell says, you got to run a good, better, best, right? This is worst case scenario. This is probably what you're going to do. And this is if you knock it out of the park, right? So let's run that pro forma 3 different ways and make sure that even at worst case scenario, you're happy.
Yeah, I totally agree. Good, better, best. I mean, everything that you said is spot on, Joe. What are you thinking for this second half of the year? Just with the real estate market as a whole, what are you seeing? Any common trends that you're seeing as well in your market?
Yeah, I mean, there's an abundance of inventory, right? So we're able to get great deals. I mean, I've gotten anywhere from 50 to 60K off sales price to 130K in seller credits to, whatever. Like we have, as buyers, we have negotiating room. I do think as this bonus depreciation bill passes, that it's going to slightly shift to a seller's market. Not saying that you're not going to be able to get good deals, but there might be multiple buyer situations on really awesome properties. Not all of them, but the biggest opportunity is the properties that you can see that have been on the market for 90, 120, 150 days and say, okay, if I can get 50K in seller credits or get them to, cover X, Y, and Z on repairs and maintenance, like I can go in and do some updates and make this property really stand out and hit better revenue goals. Because the majority of the people that are selling, they're selling because they're not making money. Too many people got into this space that didn't understand the numbers and just went with the trends and said, oh, this is a great idea, I'm going to make a bunch of money. And now 2 or 3 years later, they're not. And you have one of two choices: either sell your house and capture your loss today, or reinvest in your house and make it better. And a lot of them are choosing to sell.
Yeah, I totally agree. Changing gears just a little bit. I always like asking this question, especially the hosts have been doing it for a couple of years. What's one like nightmare story that you've had as a host? What do you got for us?
Well, it just happened. I got my first ever 2-star review that was 100% earned this year. I've never had anything less than a 4, mostly all 5s, 1 or 2 4s. And we had a house that was empty for about 4 days, nothing major. but the neighbor had a sewage backup, and so between the two houses had about a foot of sewer. So obviously, sent my handyman was out there. I coordinated with that house next door. We got it all cleaned up outside. I didn't think any like we went in the inside. There was no issues on the inside of our house. House sat there for another 3 or 4 days. Guests showed up on a Friday night at 6 p.m. and we had hundreds of roaches that got into the house somehow. And that sewage backup brought those roaches, because, it just, the moisture and everything else in Florida, there's roaches everywhere. And we do get, we're treated, we spray everything, but it infested this house. And, I had to move that guest. I thankfully had another property that was open. I'm sorry, that particular guest just wanted to stay. I offered them to go to another property, for them a refund. They said, "Oh no, it's going to be fine." Whatever. I sent the exterminator that night, but there was way more roaches than we ever imagined. They stayed there for 2 days, gave me a bad review because of the roaches. Everything else was fine with their stay. It is what it is. The next guest was supposed to check in 2 days later, and we had the exterminator out there twice, had it inspected twice, and but roaches come out at night, so they got there on whatever it was, Wednesday or Thursday that following week, and there was roaches again. Now at that one, I didn't give them an option. I immediately moved them to another property, and we ended up shutting down the listing for about 2 weeks, and had the exterminators get in there multiple times before we had another guest get in there. And unfortunately, that was in May, right before we got into peak season this year. And that's my only property. So of every single property through June, because I just ran numbers yesterday, it's the only property that's having a decrease to 2024 is that particular property. Everybody else is running anywhere from a 2 to 30% up this year.
Yeah, that's the thing that is really unfortunate when things like that happen, even though they're, or at least in my experience, I don't know you, Riley, if you've been able to do anything about it, but Airbnb won't help you, right? Like even if it's an ongoing issue, like if it's an issue that was fixed and you have the receipts that it was fixed and nobody has mentioned it ever again, if that one time it happened, it's gonna stay there for the rest of time. And so that one, how long have you had that one? Like how long?
So I've been managing that property for a year and a half. So my real quick story, my very first ever guest in that property, we had taken it over in March of 24. And our very first guest was a prominent football star for University of Tennessee and did like $1,700 worth of damage in the house. And that was the very first guest that I co-hosted. And it was from the previous manager that we honored the reservation. So I didn't get a chance to vet the guest. And we did have the $500 security deposit that we do. And we did have our rental agreement, but he left. I mean, there was nitrous oxide cartridges everywhere, holes in walls, 2 doors that were damaged. And interesting enough, I Googled the guy's name, found out who he was, and had a conversation that here's your options. I can send all these pictures over to Coach. I think Coach Hubel is the coach of University of Tennessee. It's like, I can have a conversation with your coach and about your scholarship, or you can pay me this money. And he paid within 3 days the full $1,700. So
That's such a good lesson.
But that's a great way of handling it too. The question that I was gonna have for both of you guys, right? A year and a half in, how many reviews do you think you have on that property?
So that 2-star review, because we have 40 plus reviews, dropped me from a 5.0, because I was all 5-star reviews, to a 4.92. So didn't really affect us in the search rankings. June, it was pretty flat to last year. We may have gotten a little bit of negative effect until we got a few more reviews in there, but we're back to a 4.93, 4.94, and July's looking great. So not a major setback to get a 2-star review. We overcame it pretty quick.
That was gonna be my question, right? Because I think people often freak out of like, oh my God, like what's gonna happen? And I was curious to know both your feedback, Riley, and Joe's feedback of like, if you have somebody that calls you and they have a listing that has a considerable amount of reviews, right? So 40 plus reviews, and you have that kind of ranking, what do you do? Like, how do you decide to play that game? Some people say, okay, stuff happens, you address it. Did you respond to the review that the guy left? What do you say on there? Like, how would you do risk management? Like, how do you mitigate that situation?
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it really depends on how many reviews you have and when that list, how old that listing is. I think like when you first start out, you have to get that 5-star review, or else Airbnb will just throw you down in their algorithm. They won't show you back up again. The only option there is really to relaunch a new listing in a different profile. So if you're starting on a new listing, you have something like that, even a 4-star. It's happened to me. I had a place in Pinehurst last year that we launched. I got a 4-star, which the guy said, great place, but got a 4-star, called, yeah, I know. He couldn't called him. He didn't ever call Airbnb to change it to a 5. And so we got a bunch of 5 stars after that, but I was still on like page 3, page 2, and this is in Pinehurst. So it's not like, PCB, which has, if you're on page 2 or 3, you're doing good. If you're on page 2 or 3 in Pinehurst, you suck. So we ended up shutting that listing down, creating a new one, and our revenue's up. It's like 20% this year just from creating that one new listing. So yeah, it really depends on when you get that review. And when you first start out, it's do as much as you can to get that 5-star. I would probably refund the guest and find a new place for them. Or I've got a little tagline now. Like I'll call them and just say, hey, like our business runs on reviews. And, if we can still get that 5-star review, I'm happy to put you in a new place. But this is a new listing. And if you're not willing to do that, I totally understand. But if you are, I'm willing to refund you or do whatever so that we can keep the momentum and keep that 5-star.
Yep.
100%. So Joe, what does the future look like for you guys? And what is something that you guys are excited about moving forward?
Well, I mean, we're bringing on a couple new properties that my wife is in the middle of designing right now that we're going to be bringing on in August and September. We're looking at purchasing another short-term rental so we can take advantage of that bonus depreciation by the end of this year. So at one point, we actually owned 3 total short-term rentals. We sold 2 of them, and we're upgrading and getting another one. We're actually taking a little trip west for the next 2 weeks, and we're actually going to tour a couple communities that in mountain markets because I still want to continue to buy at the beach, but I also want to diversify and have another market. So we're exploring a couple mountain markets to get some of that winter income because there's no, as great as the beach is, there's not a whole lot you're going to do December and January to make a ton of money down there. And we get booked and we make some money, but obviously there's a big difference between December and January and June. So we're looking to expand into a second market, maybe add a couple co-host properties wherever we invest so we can have a summer and winter income markets across our portfolio.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, Joe, it was great to have you on the show. For people that are interested in finding out more about you or connecting with you or working with you for your market, where can people link up with you?
Yeah, so obviously part of the Savvy Realty team, and actually as a secondary part of the Savvy Realty team, I've actually created the Savvy Emerald Coast team. So I've actually hired 3 agents underneath me. We have Leah, who's our 30A Destin Fort Walton expert. She lives in 30A, knows that market really, really well. And then I have Kate and Philip Munoz, who own 5 properties and co-host a total of 6 more down in the Forgotten Coast. So they're joining my team for everybody on that end. So Mexico Beach, Port St. Joe, Cape Sandblast. Everybody knows me as the PCB guy. So you can go to schedule an appointment with me at savvy.realty/Joe. Or, if you find me on social media, Joe Rohne, or I'm sure you guys have seen me post because I'm pretty active in social media and try to, get out there and spread good information and help anyone, anywhere that I can. And, just love this community. The biggest thing that I love about the short-term rental community is that we are all in it to win. Like, I want my co-hosts that are down in Panama City Beach to crush it. I want the realtors on the other team to crush it. Like, we all can win in this business. There doesn't have to be us versus them or, anything like that. Like, I am rooting on my competitors because, there's just enough opportunity out there for all of us. So truly love this community for that.
100%. And the last question, and I know this question is coming, Joe. What is your number one secret to success with short-term rentals?
Man, take the leap. You know what? I mean, not sitting on the sidelines, it doesn't mean risk your entire family, but take that leap and believe in yourself. If you truly believe in yourself and what you're doing, you're going to be successful. I sold my lawn and landscape business when I first got my first co-host deal in January of 23 because I knew I needed that summer to grow my co-hosting business. And I can tell you that 2023 was the least amount of money that I've made even still owning our business in well over a decade. And, my girls that are used to buying things, I'm like, hey, we're on a tight budget. Like, you're getting ramen noodles and macaroni and cheese, right? Like, that's where we're at because we're building something new and we're building something great. And then 2024 hit and it was the most amount of money I've ever made. And I'm going to double that again this year. So, like, literally, ramen noodles to, multi six-figure co-hosting business in 2 years. And if you believe in yourself, you can do it.
Oh yeah, man. I love that. And I love that you share that with the girls. I think that's such a powerful thing. Because I think for the longest time, especially like in my culture at least, it's very taboo for your parents to openly talk about money and to openly share with you the moves that they were making. Like there was a conversation for the adults and a conversation for the kids. And with the life that I've decided to lead now, I realized that it was a disservice for me not to learn about business and money earlier. And so if you guys are listening to this and you have kids, do what Joe does. Do what Riley's going to do soon, right? It's like involve them in your business and help them understand what mommy and daddy do and why they do the things that they do and how they can then do the same thing for themselves in the future, right? Because whispering about money habits, it doesn't help your kids create good ones.
No, I actually required my daughter to read Rich Dad Before Poor Dad before I would pay her tuition bill at Mizzou. And my youngest daughter, who has been helping my wife with design, is decided she's going into architecture and design because I told her, I said, we're not, licensed degree designers, but my wife has a really good eye for this space. But, you get the Ashita level that has that degree that can look at structures of a property and move walls and take and make these massive super properties. And my daughter has just kind of got the bug on that, and she wants to understand the blueprints of how to take the design to the next level and continue to hopefully help us in this business. And maybe she ends up not even helping us in this business and it takes her down a totally different path, but right now she's got a big interest. She's going to be a senior in high school and we're super excited about that. So she's definitely got that entrepreneurial mind, kind of like we do.
I love it. Yeah, the apple never falls far from the tree. So that's awesome. Well, guys, we do hope you enjoyed the show. I had a blast. Riley, any last minute thoughts before we wrap?
No, man, that's great. Doing it for the family. I think that's really part of the culture of what we have in this community too, in the short-term rental community. Like you said, it's family first. So it's a great quality, Joe.
It truly is, and I appreciate it. And man, I've learned so much from your guys' community, your podcast. I got people that are in my network and my little mastermind, which, that are also in your mastermind, and I'm not a big mastermind. I just have a handful of people that I started, 2 years ago and said, hey, let's just hop on a weekly call and help each other learn and grow. And that's kind of what it is. I'm not, charging a bunch of money or anything like that. I truly just want to, help each other out. And I've seen 4 people leave their W-2 jobs over the past couple of years. And I truly love what you guys are doing and the amount of people you're able to get financial freedom for. And that's why E and I had a call recently about me doing some coaching with him and having him help me out to get to that next level, because the one thing that I learned in this business is you should not do it alone. And if you're trying to do this business alone, you're in the wrong space and you're going to learn a lot of hard lessons. So to be able to network with people like you at the Short Term Secrets, man, it's I've watched it change people's lives, and it's pretty awesome. And I appreciate everything you guys are doing.
We appreciate it. And if you're listening to this and that is your goal for the year, we have helped 17 people so far quit their job this year. We give out what we call the Freedom Award. So if you're listening to this or watch it on YouTube, you can see Riley's Freedom Award right behind his head. Is a beautiful golden disc that we send people. And so if that is your mission for this year, for yourself, for your family, reach out to us. Reach out to me, reach out to Riley, reach out to Mike. We're here to help you guys. And again, this is the one key metric that we keep track of as Secrets. It's how many people do we help create the life. And so if that's you, just reach out to us. We're here to help you. And having said that, we'll see you guys next week. All right, guys.
Thank you.